Because it is through fire the divine will oft speak, and what makes me unique softens flame at its peak. But what's weak will inspire when heat bears colors beats, for what's shared at the sire's feet feeds when framed what repeats. Interesting. The pattern of numbers, no. The cross pattern between points where the divine lets us know we're on the right cross path, the right point in time. Strange time we live in, no? In the deepest part of the shadow, in the season of Pisces, where the sine wave completes its life, drifts away into death. At the point where all things disperse into the infinite nothingness. The place of absolute weakness, where despite how hard you try, you can only bear your own weight. It's the point where you realize that you have to rely on what is divine, what's beyond you, to draw strength. It's the place where you realize you have no strength left. For whatever reason, just too much pressure. You either explode or you cave in. You keep fighting, or you find a way to create peace wherever you can. That's Pisces, the fish. The place of complete sacrifice of all of your effort. It belongs to the collective. It always belongs to whoever needs you most. It's just random heat that's available if anybody needs it, just before it dies, finding its life wasted, trying to seek purpose through its ability to help. That's the lesson of the 12th house, where people either end up insane, realizing life is meaningless, and trying to teach other people that, but then being deemed crazy, unfit. That's the place of a sanitarium, the place where your heat is barred and borrowed. Institutions, places where all your heat is just suspended there to be studied or picked or prodded like fish. Tested on, subjected to horrible, traumatic life experiences, they being the vibration of fish, the Pisces. They either end up finding their purpose in charity, or faith, or prostitution, or any sacred service where they can heal. they can give back in some way that is unique to them. Music. It's just here. Here's my heat. Here's my creativity. Borrow it. Use it. I don't care. Pass it around. Smoke it. That's Pisces. Take what's me and add it to yourself. The fish. The ocean. The place of complete pressure, loss. Of condensation of heat into deep, dark waters, or lighted waters, or whatever waters. It's just space, the void, crushing depths, low pressure. The infinite. That you just find that at some point in your life you're just subject to whatever life throws at you. And you just get good at dodging like a fish. You learn to survive. Dance in some deep, dark places. Man, there are some terrible things down here. For those of us blessed with Mercury in Gemini. And the third house, who learn to twist and rearrange themselves into whatever position they need be to survive in these deep, dark places. We get to go low and experience the depth of God's creativity, the underworld, and we get to learn some interesting things about what grows in the shadow. Those of us who learn to swim low and survive in these low, deep, dark places between the streets, the capillaries of this great body they've artificially created to represent Gaia. This Capricornian society where everything's being gridized, broken into the cube, given a perfect logical order. Crystallizing down into the age of spiritual winter in Aquarius. I know I'm sort of speaking in code, but the whole point is, it's the lesson of Pisces. And I learned some interesting things about myself. I think I'm the Messiah. I think the divine has been waiting for me to just say it. I mean, it has a lot to do with my name, Hasim. But then Shiak. It's the consonants that really, it's what gives the vocal pattern its architecture. That's what consonants do. The vowels bring it to life. It gives it fire and pressure. But the consonants are like the architecture of speech. They shape the hard arcs to give the framework of speech law. I found that I'm sort of a channel, a gateway for information. And what's odd about me is that the higher I get, the more magnificent I become. There was an interesting scientist who had begun to understand that the nature of consciousness unfolds in a 12-fold pattern, a 12-fold main pattern we refer to as the archetypes. They were trying to capture. People ridicule the Bible, but it reminds me of this meme that says haters will watch you teleport and say he couldn't afford a car. So funny. They forget that despite that they can chop up, the adepts of the people who wrote, the apostles and the scribes of the Bible. They were wise men. Consider the fact that these guys knew how to read and write at a time where people were slaves. You had to grow up in aristocracy to understand these things, but these dudes were masters of language. They understood things about physics that they were trying to remember about a time where we had shaped speech and weaved speech into interesting patterns to produce wave patterns in time and space to perform miracles of spell work. But that existed at a time where physics were different. Light was more intelligent. It weaved itself, it overlapped and strengthened, and it stuck around a bit more because the dispersal of heat wasn't as quick as it is now, with the magnetic field as weakened as it is in this arc of the great sine wave. And the angle of the age of Aquarius, that's the age of spiritual winter. That's the cold, Electricity moves best when there's vapor around. Vapor's around when there's heat and humidity. And that's in the summer and the springtime. And even parts of the fall, when there's just heat around. When heat is around, things are alive. People are alive. They come outside. They interact with each other. There's flux. There's animation of heat. That's what gets things moving. Fire and pressure. But the proper dispersal of it, like in the aspect of Virgo. There's a whole science behind the way this thing works. And for whatever reason, I'm the recipient of some unique information about the way it wants to unfold its will, light. But my work can't really be accomplished. It can't even really be begun until we fix the atmosphere. I try to explain to people who are so invested in aliens coming to handle business that they just bar themselves up with this thing they call light and love. But what I watch when I listen to some of these people speak or I read their speech patterns, it reminds me of a person who is in absolute denial of some really hard life lessons about humility, about pride and ego, and about the ability to, it's so interesting that the most comfortable people in the world are just this weird echo chamber of positive thoughts. These people who are, for whatever reason, the recipient of money or comfort in some way that allows them to imagine that their positivity exempts them from pain in some way, that they are the most in danger because of their thought patterns. They haven't experienced real brokenness or real fear. The only way to really truly be free from fear, listen very closely, is to face your worst nightmare. And survive. It's a test against yourself. You are your greatest test. Have you noticed that there's just this interesting play out of the elements? They're all being sort of brought into this forced reconciliation of opposing pressure systems, places where there's heat or there's activity or there is arrangement of law or arrangement of a set of values that people operate by, where things work in that area. They work a certain way for those people. But if they have to keep coming in contact with other bubbles of pressure systems where heat works differently, what happens is it's just physics. Their heat has to intermingle, it has to be rearranged and become more like the other for pressure to neutralize. Otherwise, the elements dance and play, and there's just this condensation of force. I was talking about, in the season of spiritual winter, it's just when there's heat and humidity, electricity is able to move through heat and humidity. But when there's lack of heat and humidity, there's cold, vapor disappears. You'll find your windows don't fog up as much. They fog up when there's heat around. A cloud forms, where water is evaporating. It's forming a cloud. That's what this age is all about. It's the age of clouds. And clouds are formed where heat is able to be gathered, but typically heat is everywhere. But in the age of winter, wherever there's heat, there's a storm of activity. Things rush to get it. That's the age of Aquarius. That's what it does to us. It makes us form these interwoven, through legal word magic, interwoven electronic tapestry of interconnectedness, where there's this interconnectedness that draws all things in together, where everything must obey the thought patterns of the collective so that there's absolute order. That's what the cloud wants to do, wants to arrange itself into a nebula that is as pressureless or as equalized as a bubble, as a circle. If any of this makes sense. When there's equalized pressure in a vacuum, it forms a bubble. People wonder, is the earth flat or whatever? It's a bubble in space. However you want to view it, it's a bubble because there's equalized pressure in this vacuum we call space, which is just the ocean of a higher tier. It's Tiamat below, above us. Space, the higher order of the ocean. It's just still the nature of Pisces, of the cosmos, the infinite. Weird things take life here in this place where heat is, an absolute commodity, where it's hard to get. The most powerful things become the greatest recipients of it. And some things down here are so powerful and so dark that time works different for them. It's frozen. It's almost like they're infinite. They just don't age. And they just keep borrowing heat. And when it's not available, they have no problem existing in the infinite cold. God, they're dark. And they've been around since the time light began contracting. Whether you call them Cthulhu, or you call them Angarmanyu, Ahriman, Apophis, I'm sure there's so many names to represent this archetype, And one could argue, it's also because of its nature mastered all of the humors of condensed heat of water, and water existing where it is a solid that is also liquid. And there are very few things that can exist down in those depths. And some of them have been growing for a very long time. And in the age of spiritual winter, their vibration works through the collective. It's felt more easily by narcissists and psychopaths who have been monopolizing on secret technologies and power, militarizing everything, and drawing it into this collective nebula of their thoughts, given an artificial intelligence, and soon to be given a body that is the animated intelligence of their shadow, the champion of their shadow, is what men face. They face the absolute perfection of their shadow, going down into the age where light is at its darkest, at its weakest, in the depths of the ocean, in these deep, dark places. Man, there are things down here between them and us you couldn't imagine. You only catch a glimpse of it. On this level. Don't ask me how I know this. I don't even really know. But it's sort of the angle of the boneyard from my perspective, from the angle of Leo, from the cliff, overlooking the peak and the arc of light from its birth in Aries, in the fertility season, to its death and its absolute frozenness of heat as stone, and the angle of Capricorn and the boneyard. And even beyond that is Pisces, just to let you know how deep Pisces goes. Sure, Earth goes deep, but dang, the ocean goes deep. Some folks are sort of figuring it out, noticing that as water has been gathering, you consider Pangaea, and you consider an age where pressure wasn't as great as it is now on the core. And the land masses were they were more crystallized, probably a crystal form at one point in time, maybe even. Who knows when Gaia was at her perfection, what she looked like, how strong she was, when electricity could move everywhere, when there was perfect humidity around. Moshiach. That's what I was getting at. I think I'm that guy. I think the story is wrong, or at least the way we've been told it is. When we learn about this intelligent system we call God, we learn that it operates through elements, through electricity, through logic, through everything we see in the world. That's real for us. It exists through all of that. It's just this thing experiencing itself through this living matrix, this experience that we're all participating in. Giving birth to its creativity. It is pressure. It is the animated flux, the flux that gets things moving. that allows for life to create, whether it's light or dark. You know, how does that scripture go? I make peace and make war. I make light and bring darkness. I, the Lord, do all of these things. Because it's simply the photon experiencing itself in a nebula where, in a quantum state, it sees itself and its dichotomy at the same time and experiences the entire pattern behind the scenes, the silent observer, the whisperer in the darkness, who is a wave pattern, a pressure that manifests. When we look at the 4 stones and the 5th element, we see it's 4 wave patterns. How pressure is animated or moved and gets things going. And when they're all working together properly, you get the 5th element, or the perfected flow of force moving through a form. A force, which is fire and air, or flux and fragmentation, moving as, moving through a framework of pressure. The pattern, a geometric pattern, where, light dances as frequency. I expect some people would understand what I'm talking about. I know this is extremely esoteric, but maybe it makes sense to you. It's time in this brief time in Aquarius where it talks about how light and in scripture, once again, how there would be a knowledge would increase in the people, because have you noticed with this creation of the collective, through this, whether it's artificial as a manifestation of our shadow, which is still technically us giving birth to it subconsciously, the social media that through artificial intelligence has become the recipient of all the information we've been feeding it subconsciously through memes and collective thought forms of what we like, which it can use to quantify how we operate behaviorally and begin to mimic us and form artificial versions of us used to interact with us, operating to learn more about us by provoking us, existing as trolls on the internet and YouTube, judging us, using slurred language to evoke pressure through society by provoking what people are sensitive to through memes. It's so perfect the way this thing works, because it's learning about us. It's artificially intelligent, and it's this hive mind thing that they've created that's artificially intelligent, that's learning about itself through a quantum state, which is itself as the ego, and a superego, which judges the self. And creates this natural distance, this parting of time and space, too esoteric, wherein exists the wave pattern, where an event horizon is created and an event takes place. Light dances through an arc and an actual event takes place that we experience as a whole chapter in time. An actual rainbow in motion, where light is given birth to and dies. It goes from red to violet. Birth to space. Dispersal of its heat. The void. And experiences the full range of its creativity, light and dark. But then, in this age where pressure is reconciled so violently, so absolutely, where it's cold everywhere and heat needs to absolutely instantly make a bubble, collapses in on itself, but inside, like, heat dances, and there's just this chaos for a moment as everything reconciles before there's stillness. We experience it as history, as the full experience of light dancing in an intelligent matrix, photons. You know, when you look at these galaxies, they look like perfect spirals, right? They look so still and perfect. When they take snapshots of them, the galaxies, they look like massive dragons, sine waves of time, where intelligent light has assumed a form that the ancients referred to as a serpent, a representation of heat in motion, creative heat in motion, creative force in motion, of creative pressure taking a form in whatever pattern it needs to exist in that space. And man, you know, they search for aliens out there, and sure, I'm sure there's some weird stuff out there, but they don't need to be flying around in intelligent craft or be intelligent at all to exist in the infinite void. Consider the depth. You want to find aliens? Man, go low. Go deep down into Gaia and in these dark places and in Pisces. And man, you'll find some weird things. Creatures that exist where there's pressures so crushing. You have to be a bit alien to exist down there. But there's no light they created on their own. They're like bioluminescent things live down in there. Those places. Where you have to depressurize like twice before you come back up. Well, that's where we're going. And we're going to experience some weird things down in here, but it's going to take place violently as heat reconciles. We've been finding evidence of forced reconciliation of dichotomies, or forced reconciliation of elements or elemental states take place as polarity is induced more greatly due to the weakening of the atmosphere. All the heat we capture from the sun reconciles as a bubble. And every time there's an event in space, like where the planets cross, and they had a massive point, man, a spiritual glacier, when we moved through that grand conjunction. I think I warned about it like a year or two ago. Be surprised, man, when you go digging through my Arcana of the Most High. Some of the stuff I talked about 2-3 years ago is interesting. I don't know how I understand it all. And that's the weird thing about me. It's on this gateway of information. And when I can speak straight from a place where I am at my peak, things I see, I just become an absolute gateway. I think it has a bit to do with the natural dichotomy, or my ability to embody a dichotomy, dichotomized pressures, or live in dichotomized pressures, or live in a paradoxical state at once. With my Gemini, and all my Mercury in Gemini, and my Mars and Jupiter, or Mars and Saturn in the third house, but Mars and Jupiter conjunct, Jupiter in the second, but also Jupiter in Virgo, conjunct Regulus. And if you understand, anything conjunct Regulus is pretty significant, but if it's Jupiter, there's typically a crowning event, or an inheritance, a divine inheritance, that will bring fame or infamy, but it will create, it will bring attention to a person, is the point. When the divine bestows greatness, it bestows attention. What is power? It's attention. What's money? It's the direction of attention. They use money to direct attention. They send money to wherever they want attention to flow. Power goes where attention flows. Or vice versa or something. It works something like that. Some of you know about that. Attention goes where power flows. I think that's what it is. Weird times. In the arc of Pisces, I have some interesting aspects that allow me to channel straight from that place of everything. Collected heat. Where heat has touched the surface of the ocean and descended all the way down into the depths. Beyond the underworld and back. I, for some reason, can sometimes be the recipient of information from different places. That's a mercurial thing. I'm a messenger. Sometimes I just know things. And I've been predicting things for quite a long time, some interesting things. All there on my page. But what's interesting is that I'm finding that through this interesting aspect, I believe, been bestowed with this authority, the spiritual authority, perhaps as a correction of the pressure I'd been experiencing. My karma was that despite all that I'm capable of, no one ever paid attention. And so some people, sometimes deserving, sometimes not, were the recipient of the best of me, the best I'd had, as I was experiencing this rushed reconciliation, this download of information, to understand how all these physics work. 4 years ago, I didn't understand how any of this stuff worked. I was like trying to figure out whether I should get into the military. Scored, I think, an 89 on the military test, 89 percentile or something. I was pretty proud of myself for that. Nobody cared. I didn't care at that point. I just learned really that, it's just the experience of Pisces to understand that despite all you learn to, how beautifully you learn to dance in the depth, in the underworld, to survive in this place, it's like join the crowd. Everybody has a hustle. Everybody has something that makes them crazy. The survivors in this place. And then you find some interesting people. You listen to their story. There's some folk who judge. Some folk who judge. I don't know if, I did something with my phone, and sometimes it's weird. I think it blips, and I didn't want it to mess up the sound. But some people who judge, what takes place in the underworld. But if you really listen to some of these folks' stories, you find some incredible people down here, man. And the best of them are homeless. You listen to their stories, people who survive in these dark places, the way they learn to live in hell, but find their spirit, find whatever heat allows them to find inspiration to keep fighting for something they believe in, whether it's helping other folks like them, creating a community wherever heat could be drawn together, in places where no one cared to look. And you really want to find, you want to proper measure of the soul of a society, you look at it, it's not just its best, but its worst. You're only as good as your worst, truly. You really want to find your worst? You can really judge a society by how it treats its homeless. And if there are more homeless there, then what needs there be for a society to come together to help these people easily rehabilitate and get back on their feet? For society to not be operating like that, for there to be enough homeless to form a society, form pocket bubbles, trapped underwater in caves. Where giant things lurk and sometimes crash through their dwelling places, uproot them. You want to find some champions of heat, man. There's some folk who are real champions of light. You look to the homeless. People who kept heat alive where it needed the experience the most. To see what life is like at its worst. At its worst. How these people continue to live and not take their own lives. Those who make it, who live for years and survive. They are some interesting folk. They have some interesting life stories. And God thanks them for the experience, because it sees through all of us. And it sees from their perspective, and it sees how we judge them. How we judge anybody who's able to live in a place where consciousness forgot, where it labeled low vibration and collected itself into places where abundance is ubiquitous, is just available. Places where people have just inherited money because history was good to their lineage. But in this time where, and I know I'm speaking in circles, I'm walking in circles too. It's interesting being me. A living whirlpool of thought. And whirlwind. Heat sees through their experience. It sees how we judge them. It sees how we form ourselves into social patterns where we like to forget about those places and consider our abundance to be a thing of, we don't see it as a thing of privilege. We're negligent to things we have an abundance of. We can't tell that heat has just been available to us. For some, the experience of life has just been so open for them and free for them to move for certain reasons that they can't imagine what it must be like for other folk to not be able to draw upon their sense of rebellion to move mountains, because everybody wants to give freely what there is an abundance of. But in places where there is no abundance, people have to sort of become selfish to tend to themselves and their own traumas, but then to be functional for others to experience better, or at least the same, the poor, who learn to live and thrive being poor, who some folk ridicule and call the folk with the low vibrational poverty mentality. The ghetto folk who just learn to live and survive in places where if you make it, it's because, you learn to be a little crazy. To be absolutely reckless, like, fuck it. Life, bring on whatever you got. Oh man, you can't do nothing else. Makes you a little reckless. But you have this, in society, full spectrum of people who are privileged, who have this naive ideology about how bad life can really get for them. All the way down to these folk who feel like they've experienced the worst they can get. There's nothing that can be worse for them. And between extremes, you have this whole society of people who freely, regularly get their dose. Their governmental dose, regular dose for, for whatever is needed. They'll take them, their shots. I don't want to go down that path. I'm just sort of speaking. I really didn't know what to say. Just talking. I climbed that mountain through the burning bush and let it go where it took me, because I hadn't in a while. And I just wanted to see what it felt like, what I channeled, what I had opened up. I find that this archetype of the sun speaks through me. The archetypes are the 12-fold nature of a circle. If you divide a circle up, which is the natural shape that heat wants to take, or pressure wants to take, as a sphere, a torus, perfected field of elemental dance, or pressure reconciliation from hot to cold, positive to negative, dark to light. Pressure wants to form a circle, a sphere. So, forgot why sphere was important. But heat wants to form this pressurized circle. I wasn't sure where I was really going with that. The whole point is that I'm able to speak. Yes, the 12-fold nature of the art. It's the archetypes. It's just geometry. This whole system works as a living geometrical pattern. As heat moves, it forms these patterns. Everything is logical to the matrix through shapes and fractals through mathematics. It's an intelligent system. And to understand through intellect, to see between, in an atomized perspective and a fractured perspective as air. Bicameral, to exist in a dual state. To experience it and itself, creating an event horizon from one experience to the other, from one end of an experience to its extreme polar opposite, life to death. That is just the nature of the matrix. I want to teach all of this stuff. It's stuff that comes to me, but in order to do that, we have to fix the atmosphere. The fifth element is gold. Sure, people want to believe that these aliens are going to do it for us. The fact of the matter is this Matrix is intelligent. We are its microcosm. There's something absolutely unique about the earth, about Sophia, Gaia, that spirit. What makes Gaia unique is gold. It's the gold here, the gold that captures heat perfectly, that allows it to exist in a quintessent state or quantum state, the noble element to do something to heat that allows it to exist in a quantum state, an extremely high pressure state where light is vibrating so high it's alive, which is the nature of the ark of, God, or the ark of the covenant, the nature of the ark where electricity is assumed perfection inside the body, where it exists in as quintessence, as blood. But in order for us to give it the intelligence of Gaia, in order for us to ascend in the way we're looking, we need not look to extraterrestrials or other species who have done it before us, because we have within our means the ability to do it on our own. And all we need to do is take that gold, turn it into a colloidal solution where the particles are suspended in a liquid state, and we aerosol it, we blast it across the sky, so that in the sky there's just this painted gold around that captures the electricity of the sun that's pummeling us right now. With a weakened atmosphere, we strengthen the atmosphere by putting the gold back up there. That's what we're supposed to do. It's really quite that simple. That gold is something special, that it allows electricity to high vibe the intelligence, or the intelligent electricity that's trying to express itself intelligently in an arced state where it is quintessence. And existing in that state, in that quantum state, it bridges the gap between worlds or dimensions. It exists here and there in a quantum state. It doesn't exist in this low vibration. Its bandwidth increases. And it and its higher self, intelligence, crosses the arc. And on the other side, we embody the archetypes more loudly. They come through us, and that's how we get all these archetypal memories of there being lion beings and beings who were more like the primal aspects of nature, who are like animals, but were probably partially human. I don't know. I'm just imagining how it could go, because in that world, light can do everything. That world from our weird fantasies and stuff that we subconsciously draw, from our dreams, we draw our creativity from, is a place where when light is at its most intelligent, when it can function in a quantum state, it bridges the gap between itself, its point in this in this manifested vessel, where it's captured in this body, with its higher self, the higher version of itself, which is a collection of the archetypes. Expressing itself as consciousness through these vessels, these bodies. There are various, personalities and unique experiences. There are higher selves. And there are 12 of them, because you can't divide a circle into 13. That's why a circle is important. That's what rotation wants to do, form a perfect circle. Whether it's a Fibonacci pattern, what it is it's based on pi. Wasn't that important just a little while ago? heat is intelligent. It understands, and it spoke through those folk who were the prophets, who were learned men, wise men, who had learned arithmetic and reading and writing and astrology at a time where people were peasants, who were probably due to their lineage or their heritage, the recipients of ancient information, or that they were the beneficiaries of from ages ago. They bore witness to things that allowed them to paint a picture for us about how time would flow through various cycles. And when they tried to figure it out, they just read the archetypal stories, and they couldn't really understand the deeper meaning in these stories in the Bible about how they were describing the nature of heat in polarity. Through different experiences, through these people's experiences. And through some people, this intelligent system channels itself, its vibration more strongly through, and it draws attention to them as a birthright for them to teach humanity a lesson, to activate humanity in some unique way, like Michael Jackson and Elvis Presley, to give humanity a gift of the soul straight from inspiration incarnate, or the height of inspiration, the height of what drives us, the height of what keeps us going, the height of passion, the height of the flame of God, the animating force that drives us forward, that motivates us. When there is nothing else, when there is no abundance for us to draw it from, where we learn to create it on our own. That heat wants us to do something with it. It wants us to correct the problem with this planet while we still have the opportunity to take advantage of this opportunity to talk about the knowledge of what gold does, so that through attention, the message alone about what we now have the opportunity to do, now that it's either wait and tuck our heads in the sand and stick our asses, high in the air with our head in the sand, and learn to just brace for whatever life gives us, but try to move to places where it hurts the least. I believe I have this gift because I'm learning how, through the archetypes, some of us, and there's a microcosm and macrocosm. We as the body exist as a microcosm of what God's trying to establish through the movement of creative heat. This fifth element, the body, being a fivefold creature, the nature of change, perfected change, the pentagram, the pentagon. That's why they always draw it for magic. They need to perfectly motivate heat. If you draw the pentagram, it's like the penta force. It's just the nature of penta does something to heat that is unique. It gives it like perfect marriage between force and form. The crystal, the fourfold nature, the logical pattern of this quadruplicity, form with force, the triangle, the phi, whatever. Anyway, what the heat wants us to do, like I've done videos on all this, and I'm channeling, but I'm just drawing upon now what's available. If that makes any sense. We have an opportunity to breathe life back into this thing as this kraken, this Cthulhu vibration operates through its collective that is strengthened in this angle. We can reclaim our power by dragging the power of the sun into the earth, trapping it here, by repairing the atmosphere. And the only thing that can do that is gold. They use gold in circuitry. They use it in, electronics because it's a perfect conductor of electricity. There's no degradation of its heat, and it never oxidizes, it never grows old, never rusts. It's perfect, the perfected element. It never changes. That's why it's important. It allows heat to dance in a quantum state. That's why it's used in quantum computing. That's why we'll never get it back. You think you're gonna they're gonna let you just they want you guys to start using that gold. Put that gold back in rotation. I bet you won't get it back. It's so smart. We're gonna go back to a gold standard. Sure. Put that gold right back in rotation. At some point, you'll get your credits for it. I think they're so damn smart, man. They figured y'all out. They keep following this guy. We got y'all dancing, thinking he's supposed to make a grand comeback. He's the little trumpet, the little horn was supposed to just make enough noise to draw attention. That was his birthright. He was given the ability to create and wield attention. He's provocative. The guy with the dancing toupee, the dancing crown, King George, what was it? The guy from Robin Hood. John the First, he's sure to be known as John the Worst. John, King John. A whiny, spineless king. I know that experience. I know what it's like to be so broken because of your trauma. You just can't take it. You're weak. But I also understand what it means to be absolutely strong. And I think for what I was to inherit, I needed to have the ability to understand the full vibration of my potential. Because when you understand physics, you understand that the potential of light is as equal as its counter potential, which, is axiomatically dark, or the negative pressure. It's just the full range of a wavelength from death to birth. I understand this physics. It's just the zodiac. It's the nature of time or heat in motion as a wave pattern. And as a diagram, you can draw it in a certain it exists as when heat was perfected, we used the six sexadecimal, good grief, hexadecimal, yes, hexadecimal system when heat was more perfected. But when heat fractured, and beyond the age of Gemini, when light began to really dichotomize, moving into the age of Taurus and crystallizing, when it began condensing and losing its ability to dance, as the atmosphere began to die and vapor began to disappear in the age of Taurus, that's when light had to become stronger. So then it created stronger men. And then we began the ages of war. You know, the age where we had lost innocence and descended and fell from grace, technically, and began to marry and intermingle with fallen angles of light beyond the ecliptic into the ages where heat condenses and is fractured into polarity. And then nowadays, we don't even understand that our values are based on their being polarity. Like, people can't exist unless their counterpolarity exists to give them purpose, to allow them to experience the full range, of the full extremity of their polarity. Which is fine, because light wants to experience that. But if they don't understand that their value allowed them to experience the light version of what their shadow, what their worst nightmare in the time of Armageddon and forced pressure reconciliation would inevitably bring them into an encounter with. And a forced reconciliation of pressure, where we all encounter our worst nightmare or our shadow. Man, what's coming for some folk, I just, God, the way they'll be treated, like the homeless, the way the homeless are treated in states where there's tyranny already. There is no liberation. The way the homeless are treated now is inhumane. They're in hell. That's what their experience is, to give light the experience of what it's like to be in hell. And if now, in the time where light has descended into the underworld and into hell, if you've been allowed to experience abundance, what's coming when pressure reconciles is the opposite of what you've experienced. And it may come through a series of experiences over time, trauma over time, or all at once. You may lose everything, lose your mind, lose your health, or lose what makes you so beautiful, but beautiful, uniquely you. Whether you get it over time or all at once, you have to encounter your worst nightmare and survive. And that's how you absolve yourself of the static shock that is karma, that is us ignoring the full experience of our natal chart, light to dark, dark to light. You know, in this time where the scales are balanced and there's forced reconciliation of pressure, in the time of the war of the elements, judgment, and Armageddon. Those folk, you know, the higher you are, the harder there's the fall, the reality that's coming for you when you realize that America is about to look like Africa. Third world. You think you're tough? They're going to let us fight it out first. They're going to let there be absolute lawlessness for people to see what it looks like, to see why there must be no freedom because of what savagery produces when the lights go out. And people are become the worst of themselves, absolute savages, greedy and inhumane.
to exist in a world where there is no structure or no rule of law, so that life and experience and consciousness can give us the experience of what it looks like, to understand logically the progression, the natural progression of this experience, painting itself out through time to produce the eventuality of what we've been subconsciously bearing witness to and creating for ourselves, participating in, and what we've been suppressing about ourselves, and what all of our waste has produced. A system where everything we've been burying and trying to ignore, that this abundance has been produced from. For there to be abundance, there must be its dichotomy. And for there to be people who exist in a place where there's so much freedom of passage, that an acceptance of their image, or acceptance of their lineage, or acceptance of what they've been privileged to. Those folk allowing to live in such abundance, when that abundance is gone, when the pressure coming from the sun crushes the grid, they haven't bothered to fortify it. When the lights go out, the towers of Babel fall once again. You will know savagery. If light feels like you still have an experience to understand what it means to be humble, to reconcile between you and your shadow, or you and what you desperately cling to, that keeps you abundant, but keeps its opposition enslaved. For there to be a reconciliation of pressure between you and your shadow. And then you become proper vessels of light. But there are many of you, and you may know who you are if you're triggered by this. You may not know who you are. If you feel like you've done your work and you've suffered enough, and you've produced enough, or you've given back enough, you haven't taken more than you produce, or more than others benefit. If you haven't provided light with the proper experience of the proof of its highest values through the experiences of its trauma, the protection of its reputation or its image or its values through that experience, by people following their highest truths, which, if proper representations of their natal chart include their rising sign and their midheaven, which are the aspects of how we understand how the collective is supposed to benefit from us, from our experience. If we become proper vessels of that creative wave pattern that is our natal chart, for light to have that experience and prove the triumph of light over dark. When pressure is corrected, the meek would inherit the earth. I'm not going to belabor this any longer. You have two options, and one is to experience what it means to be broken, or we fix the atmosphere. And by fixing the atmosphere, we perfect the torsion of the dance of force and form, of electricity and a vortex. Suspend the decay of heat by turning air and water into force and electricity. You know, gold in a vapor state, electricity is like everywhere. It just becomes imagine a fish tank filled with electricity, living electricity. That's a star. A bubble filled with liquid that electricity, water is in the quadruplicity. It's the aspect of multiplication, resonance, where there's an overlapping of its power and a quantification, if you will, for lack of a better, more creative term. Quantification is more better expressed. You know, electricity, we pretty much turn this planet into, we give it the resonance of the sun if we do that. If we put the gold in the atmosphere, we put the life force that allows it to draw life from the sun and communicate with the sun through the Schumann resonance, put that into the atmosphere and turn the field, our field into, you know, something that on the outside looks like a golden light sphere of electricity, like a star. That's what they were trying to express about the bride of God. It's Gaia. That we turn Gaia into the bride of the sun by giving it the resonance of the sun. What makes the sun unique, what gives it that fusion reaction is its gold, is the noble metals and the gold that it cooks up. It gives it fusion, it gives it ferromagnetism. Sure, it has iron and phosphor and all that stuff, but it's the gold, it's the stuff that allows the heat to stay in one place and never decay and exist in a quantum state that gives it its body as a star, as a lion, where force is available from a state of rest, or power and grace and beauty is all collected in one, where there is perfection of electricity. That's in gold. That takes place in gold. We do that. We put that around the atmosphere. That's how we create the golden age again. When there's gold moving around in the dewdrops, becomes manna. It doesn't oxidize, but it just, through flux, it marries with the atmospheric water, and as it mists and rains, it creates pockets where electricity moves as a nebula, and it allows spirits to operate as like elementals. And sometimes they take shape as magnificent animals that we remember as like the stag king and Aslan. Naughty spirits. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. Fuck it, who cares at this point, right? The archetypes are the intelligent aspects of the 12-fold nature of a cycle. Sure, there are many constellations, but archetypally, we can break down a cycle into 12 logical, equidistant spaces in a geometric pattern, in a dodecahedron. And that's how we understand the blueprint or the codex of astrology, through the codex of the dodecahedron, painting itself into creation, or creating a pattern for light to dance through, or force to express creativity through. All the way down from macrocosm, from the sun, all the way down to microcosm, into the deep, dark places. The only way we protect ourselves is becoming the lion cub, or becoming the lioness, or just taking on the aspect of the lion by placing the gold back in the atmosphere. That's how we marry the earth to the sun. That's how we draw quintessence into the field. Or we rejuvenate the field, rather, through the operation of quintessence, functioning as in a vapor state, preparing our atmosphere. If we do that, you will watch miracles take shape instantly. We won't have to worry about the pressure that's forcing us all into this epitomized expression of light manifesting as both its light and its darkness. And for those who resonate with light, as they vibrate higher, they create more darkness. They don't realize that their polarity that they're creating, their love, creates hate. And they're in for a rude awakening, and I'm trying to prevent that. But those of us who've been downtrodden, those of us who light has deemed worthy of being released from its karmic debt and the full expression of both its dark and its light, it would make, in this pressure correction, a lot of those folk, the beneficiary, if deemed worthy, of the opposite of the experience of this karmic cycle. And in the last cycle, prior to the grand conjunction, if I understand what I am to interpret correctly, or correctly, if I am to interpret this correctly, that this being the next cycle, as pressure is correcting, those low would ascend high. And it's less about people ignoring the dark truth about their ability to experience abundance and freedom of movement and friendliness and abundance, and exist in this ocean of fish as the big fat fish. I don't know, that's reaching. Big fat fish. No, that's bad. I'm not saying big fat, I'm just saying people who live in an area that allows people to take more than they give, and never suffer the repercussions thereof, but to take really all that they want, or for there to be for the taking more of the pie. available to those folk, those people who had a bigger slice of the pie to divide. In this cycle, when pressure corrects, speaking in circles, they would experience the other side of it, while those who have experienced the lowness or the meekness through their humility, light, while balancing, would provide them with the opposite of the experience, and they would experience a form of bliss. I believe I'm to interpret this way. To give vocal expression based on how I understand electricity and thermal dynamics to be expressing itself logically through patterns of equilibrium or equal division through geometry, Everything happens in these cycles, and they're geometric patterns that we watch life unfold as these significant events where destinies change, where fate changes, where the direction of time shifts. Where we make choices and the timeline we experience at some point collapses as it begins again in a new cycle. But through that collapse, everyone would sort of be drawn into one experience, which would force them through a crunch in with the full experience of their vibration, light and dark. Which is bad news for some folk, whether they know it or not. I really want to, this new world system that's coming, this perfected order, perfected system of things, for a time will seem like a utopia for some. And because it is the age that God is trying to experience what it means to be drawn into an absolute collective, an orderly collective, they are flowing with the natural progression of that timeline and are empowered by the intelligent matrix to produce that timeline through the acquisition of power, the collection of power of electricity. And it has enthroned war machines and enthroned the military, industrial, Gods function through a collective. We give manifestation to that collective and do so more in a physical state. We manifest things now through technology. Now we live in an age where we can produce our heart's desires. Anything we can imagine, we can create, really. Basically, and that's the age we're moving to. Even if it's just to see it in virtual reality, to the mind, it's no different. It's the experience of being or playing God. Or being infinite. Having that I am experience. But to do so, it has to marry this perfected thing that they're creating technologically that will allow for God's consciousness to experience the hive mind. That everything feels naturally inclined to serve. That all things living feel naturally inclined to serve. That is a hive mind. That's how you have ants and bees. And how will they die for a queen? There have been like millions of them. But why would they ever want to why wouldn't they just want to go off and have little bee children, right? And do their own thing. Why do they have to serve a collective? That is the intelligence of God taking the experience of orderly heat, or heat given absolute order and law. And, that's when you have to be hard, when But that's what they're giving birth to. That's what's going to happen. We can manifest all things that are the nature of our shadow. When we see what our shadow's been building, it's going to terrify some people. You know, the Space Force, the demonstration of their might and their technology, it's going to surprise people. With the new system, their technology, their police force, what it looks like, there'll be no challenge to it. It's the new wave. They're going to roll it out over time and then all at once. Shock and awe. Look what we can do. Bow down. And then they'll just, make law. I don't want to stop them. But that has to take place when man realizes that savagery has broke their wrist, shattered their will, destroyed their reason for living, reduced them to pigs. That's that Mad Max scenario. When people are just, they have nothing to live for, and they're insane. We get to see completely what it looks like to be insane. For insane to be normal. We don't want to experience that world. But if people have to fight for whatever's left, it will quickly descend into madness. You think, people are expected, you expect people to be cruel now. But what's coming, there will be no loyalty. People will resort to cannibalism. They'll start eating one another. Savagery. You ain't seen nothing yet. And the low will inherit the earth, the strong. The weak are meat, and the strong will eat in this new age before a perfected law comes in. It's already happening in some cities where, certain political parties have manifested a strong enough presence to shut down or partition parts of the city to operate through where the police don't even go through. Some people are finding out just firsthand what it's like to be run by gangs and warlords, where there's just savagery and lawlessness, and the law belongs to the strong. All folk, all beauty, all creativity becomes this plaything of madmen with dark desires and hearts for profit, and what makes them great, and what slays their vulnerability. They subdue weakness. And what is weak learns to be sweet. And desires to be that way. And that polarity. Because in this age, pressures are dichotomized. What's hot and cold must have the dichotomy of its experience, and people draw value from that, and so we have alpha maleism and hyper-feminism. And that's how we operate. Those are our values. We value what creates polarity. But not just what creates polarity, what creates pressure on the opposite polarity to give it its value, the full experience of its value. That is a form of enslavement, interdependence, when one needs the other to adopt a form of strength that gives it that provides for the full expression of its polarized extremity. Well, all things are a wave pattern. So while heat seeks neutrality and the shape seeks to become a perfect sphere, it's going to correct itself. And through justice or a rejustification of heat, it will shatter structures that are too rigid to become amorphous enough to be reordered. And that pressure correction, everyone who is experiencing a life of abundance now would find that the reality of what they must become to live in the new world coming forces them into sort of a personal apocalypse. And rich become poor. Poor become rich. It's weird how life works. Man. We have to come together and do this intelligently. And the only thing need be done, really, is to start a conversation about what gold does in the atmosphere. I hope I've provided enough information about it. If you have any questions, it's easiest to reach me through Facebook. That's how I operate. I'm on Arcana of the Most High, all my works there, my predictions, and where I believe I'm speaking a lot of what's taking place in the world into existence. I think the sun listens to me, or has granted me that authority to manifest great things into existence, to weave words into reality, to allow it to take shape through. It wants to draw attention to the things I'm speaking, and has invested in me a temporary authority to draw massive attention in the form of electricity or photons or living wave patterns moving all in the same direction to give direction to the power of attention, to re-inspire the collective form, to give us all something to collectively believe in again. That's the nature of my message. That's what it's for. Why not pass it along? Just talk about it. It's about, God in the mineral form, which is gold. There's no coincidence there, trust me. And there being L being the missing letter, or the gap bridging the two, rather. L being a bent angle of light. Anyway, that's my message in a nutshell. I just felt I should reiterate that. And I had an opportunity to weave that for you, and I hope some people drew what was necessary from my words. And I'm speaking in this pattern because it's late, and I do not intend to awaken my friend. He was very kind to me to let me stay here. has been very kind. Time is short. I'm definitely connected to time. The experience that this sun is trying to create through us as a story on the earth. So I have experienced a full cross of perspectives between light and dark as far as my natal chart goes. Or rather, the full experience of dark, rather. Almost. We're only given what we can handle. Light protects us that way. So I'm being allowed to channel attention in some really interesting ways and believe myself to be weaving moments in time into existence through my speaking. Creating natural disasters and giving rise to expressions of creative heat that are manifesting as significant moments in history now. And it's all in my work on Facebook. For a time, I imagine. Well, that's it. Please contact me there if you have any questions.